Hello, fellow Movie Crusaders, and welcome to our latest episode of the Movie Crusaders Chat About. I'm Sean Wasserkrug. With me, as always, is Brian Michaels. This is our third episode or fourth episode? Lost track.
Let's say third.
Yeah, it's our third or fourth, either way. But today we are talking about reboots, remakes, requels, and the original films of movies. This has kind of been something that Brian and I had discussed for a couple years now when we have our chats about, and I think this has kind of been a big thing around Hollywood nowadays, at least for the last, probably since the 2000s, is that there's no real original ideas anymore. It's all just reboots, remakes, sequels, rehashing the same old story. Let's take this movie and let's bunch them together and make this movie kind of thing. And then of course, now requels, that's the new term. That's thanks to Scream for that. I don't think we actually had a name for it until Scream came out earlier this year. And that's kind of been the new thing, and that's what we're going to discuss today. Brian, what are your thoughts of kind of like the landscape of what this has kind of become?
Well, yeah, it's I mean, people have always, in any area you go to, people complain about, oh, there's nothing original anymore, there's always sequels. But obviously now more than ever, it seems like everything is sequels, remakes, reboots, things like that. And I mean, part of it is simply because financially speaking, it's a way bigger risk to put out something original. So when you do see something original come out, it's usually a smaller, like, independent film, like Everything Everywhere All at Once, something like that.
Like that, I was watching that, which guys, my reviews.
It's very original, but it's a very modestly budgeted film, and so they can afford to do that kind of thing. But they can't really take chances with original films that are on a giant budget, because it's just nowadays there's just too much of a risk, because superhero films and whatever else swallow tons of the money, of course.
And see, here's the thing with the superhero films, though. Not to interrupt you real quick. A lot of people want to complain and bitch about the superhero movies, but a lot of those, not counting like redoing the Batman and all that, but a lot, like especially with the MCU aspect of it, a lot of those are brand new stories. They are new. They're the characters watched, but they're new stuff that people have not seen before.
Yeah, and I have no problem with like superhero movies and franchises, things like that, because even if you don't like them, the superhero franchise, these movies that are making money, that's what's keeping your theaters open, so that they can have, maybe they have, Batman on 6 screens, but that means that they have these other 6 screens open. They can play the smaller stuff on, things like that. And it's also keeping the studios afloat. Let's be honest. The studios use the money from the blockbusters to make these other films. And so it's like, without those, it's going to support it. But that being said, I mean, they do tend to go back to, tried and trusted, properties. They look back and see, oh, what do we own? Okay, cool. We can reboot this. We can remake that. And sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes it doesn't, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, we're not talking about sequels. I mean, that's a whole other show about doing sequels, stuff like that. But you have what we call false sequels, which are basically the reboots, like Matrix Resurrections last year, which was a sequel. I was like, no, that's not. It is.
I mean, technically, it's a sequel because it's continuing the story.
But it was basically a reboot.
It's clearly trying to reboot. That's basically what the requels are doing.
Yeah, it is a requel. Yeah.
Because, I mean, you have stuff like that. You have Force Awakens, which absolutely is a sequel, but it's kind of trying to reboot with a new story, a new group of people. But it's definitely a sequel. Things like that.
Ghostbusters Afterlife, which we both enjoyed. Afterlife. I mean, it's a continuation of the story that we had 20 plus years ago, with returning characters, but they're not the focal point. It's a whole brand new core cast that when they continue on with another film, if they go that route, it's going to be probably more dedicated to them and less on these returning characters. Kind of like what they did, like you said, with Force Awakens. You had to keep some of the OG cast in there, so that way you've had that familiarity to it, but you're really trying to push this new core cast. Now, the Star Wars sequel trilogy ultimately failed, and it's not because of that. It's because they really just had no fucking plan for what they were going to do. But Star Trek 2009, that was one where
Star Trek was kind of the first high profile one to do that, because they're like, okay, we're going to reboot this franchise. But hey, what if we have Leonard Nimoy kind of ride this thread where it kind of is continuing from the old one? It's kind of that backdoor reboot kind of thing. And I think what's happened is, because, I mean, remakes have been happening all throughout the history of Hollywood. They've made so many remakes of everything. Sequels as well. I mean, going back to Universal Monsters, they're making sequels, or back to the old serials they do week to week in sequels. So that's nothing new. But then came the reboots when these studios thought, okay, we have this property, but it's kind of run its course. So what if we can start over again and reboot it? And that became a thing. But then with the remakes and reboots, what happened just in recent years, well, relatively recent years, is that the backlash against people like, oh, you're raping my childhood, or you've ruined this, and it's like that. It's like, oh, sure, yeah, you made a new Star Trek or whatever, but this isn't my Star Trek. Doesn't have the characters I loved in it. So then I think the studio's like, well, wait, how can we try and please the old fans but still bring in the new fans? And that became the birth of the requel.
Well, in terms of the character or the fan backlash of you're ruining my childhood, a lot of that I feel like stems between the Disney films and them going, hey, you remember all these beloved animated films you watched as kids, and you had the old like white version VHSs that apparently go for gangbusters now if you still have them. I used to have them. My mom got rid of them. But let's go and make these live action. And they're relatively the same exact story with maybe some small little adjustments. And some of them work, some of them don't. Jungle Book worked immensely. Aladdin, middle of the road. A lot of people bashed on Beauty and the Beast. I actually loved the new Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan of that one.
And Peach Dragon, I thought it was an improvement based off the OG one. Alice in Wonderland. We both know how we feel about the Alice in Wonderland franchise. And then you've got Lion King, which was literally a shot for shot.
Pretty much. Except for the Beyonce song, which is not a plus in my book.
Except for adding a Beyonce song and adding a 90-second video of a dung beetle pushing a piece of poo across the screen. Why? And they removed the Mufasa ghost in the sky, which was just the dumbest thing you could do.
It's like Disney always used to have a thing where they weren't going to make sequels, and Pixar even used to have a thing where they weren't going to make sequels. And of course, that changed as soon as Toy Story was a hit.
Yeah,
when they started making sequels like crazy.
Yeah.
But then Disney was going to do these live action remakes, and at first I thought they actually had a point. There's a reason for them to exist, because they started off. I believe the first one was Maleficent.
Well, the first one would have technically was Maleficent, or would have been Alice in Wonderland.
Yes, Alice in Wonderland was first.
Yeah, and then in terms of actually doing a reboot remake. A lot of people forget that Cinderella was kind of the first one outside of the Alice in Wonderland, and because
but I think Maleficent predated Cinderella.
It does.
And my thing
was a side story.
Well, that's my thing is while not everybody loved Maleficent, I thought it was actually a pretty good movie. But I thought, well, at least it has a reason to exist, because it's like, okay, we're taking a look at the story we know from a different point of view, from a different character's perspective, a different spin on it. So at least there's a reason to remake this in live action. But then by the time they got to Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, it's like, you're just copying it out in live action just so you can have something to put in the theater again and make more money. And it's like, ugh.
I mean, same thing. You can say the same thing about Cruella.
They went back to it with Cruella, which is kind of
chose to do a separate story. It was a prequel.
I would love if they did a villain's line. Do Jafar. Do Scar. Instead of Lion King, they should have done Scar. There you go.
I don't hate that because Disney ended up doing a kind of a new version of High School Musical, where isn't it I forgot what it's called, where it's all the children of the villains kind of thing.
The Descendants.
Descendants, yeah. So they have literally they could continue with that kind of thing. But I mean, yeah, it's you have these certain story lines, so especially with the Disneys, where they're like, oh, this story's outdated. We need to update it for current times. Let's force this into the live action. Aladdin immensely did that. Same thing with Beauty and the Beast to a point, but then you get some backlash stuff on that. But when they do, like you said, with Maleficent and Cruella, where it's yes, this is this story, but we're sidelining over to here and showing you this perspective, this character, stuff like that. That's not the same thing. I wouldn't even call that a reboot, remake, requel. That's just a sub story or a prequel essence kind of thing. Which one of the better animated films that a lot of people, at least for Disney, beloved was Lion King 1.5, which was literally the story of Timon and Pumbaa going through the events of the first Lion King, and it was different.
Because Lion King is based on Hamlet, okay? Yeah. And Lion King 1.5 was essentially, I don't know if anyone's seen the movie Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, which Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are these two goofy characters. Their background characters like mentioned like once or twice in the entire play of Hamlet, but they decided it was Tim Roth and Gary Oldman in the movie version of it, where they basically follow these people who like were on their own adventure, but then once in a while they kind of weave in and out of the story what's going on with Hamlet. And so Lion King 1.5 basically made Timon and Pumbaa, those two characters, did the exact same thing. And so that, yeah, I enjoyed that. I actually enjoyed Lion King 2 Simba's Pride, which was basically Romeo and Juliet instead of Hamlet.
Exactly. I said Lion King was one of the few. I think Aladdin had some pretty solid sequels as well. Those were two of the actual animated films that actually did a good job of continuing the story without trying to force the narrative. If you wanted to watch it, you would just buy the VHS or wait for it to pop on the Disney Channel. They didn't try to force it in theaters to try to make an extra buck. They just wanted to continue the story.
Yeah.
Whereas with these ones now, you're seeing they want to make another Jungle Book. They want to make another Beauty and the Beast. They want to make another Aladdin. And it's like, just stop. Like you barely crossed the finish line of making these movies work.
But
stop pushing.
Lion King is also like one of the top 20 grossing movies of all time or something now. So it's like they're not going to stop.
Not the latest one.
Oh yeah.
Well, you got to think about inflation.
Not just for inflation, but it outgrossed the original.
Yeah, but no, it's but I mean, in terms of like ones that also work in terms of remakes for Disney. I mean, you have The Parent Trap, which I think was with Lindsay Lohan. I think that one worked as a solid remake for introducing a whole new younger audience to that older story. Same thing with Freaky Friday and Herbie Fully Loaded, another Lindsay Lohan one. All three of those Lindsay Lohan, actually, where they took a story from, what was it, like the 60s, 70s, I think? Wasn't that where the original...
Parent Trap was late 60s.
Yeah, and then they brought it into the 90s, or early 2000s, I can't remember the exact time frame, but they made it work for today's audience. And those remakes were successes. They actually did really, really, positively with audiences and, box office, stuff like that. But then you have, and we're eventually going to get off the Disney train, but we're focused on it right now. But then you have like Peter Pan, where they've tried redoing Peter Pan over and over and over again. Hook, I like Hook. A lot of people don't like Hook. I actually enjoy Hook. But then you got like Pan, and you've got the, was Pan the one where they were trying to make Captain Hook sexy and a good guy?
Pan was the one that had Hugh Jackman. As
he was Blackbeard or something. He wasn't Hook.
That's right. He wasn't Hook. Oh, yeah, that's right. Hook was Garrett Hedlund in that movie. I recall.
What's that?
Garrett Hedlund, I believe, was Hook in that movie.
He was Hook, and he was supposed to be.
But then there was an actual just Peter Pan, which was Jason Isaacs as Captain Hook. But I mean, my thing with those, it's a matter of what you consider a remake. Because if Disney was remaking Peter Pan as Peter Pan live action, that would be a remake to me. These are ones that are going back. They're just another adaptation of a book, a classic book. It's like saying, someone makes another Romeo and Juliet. Is it a remake of the earlier Romeo and Juliet movie, or is it just another adaptation of the original book?
In terms of that, though, with Peter Pan, it's the same story over and over and over again. Whereas, like something like Robin Hood, each version of Robin Hood is different in its own way. I mean, what's that?
Yes, they are. We've discussed those.
Yes, I mean, you have the animated one. I mean, you have the original Robin Hood from back in like the 30s, and then Disney did it with animals, and then you got Princess of Thieves. You got the spoof version with Man in Tights, and you got the Russell Crowe trying to make it like this gladiator version of Robin Hood, and then you've got basically the copy and paste of Batman Begins or Robin Hood. I mean, those ones are constantly trying to remake the story. They're adding little different things here and there. And ultimately for Robin Hood, it's just like with Peter Pan, it's failed pretty much almost every single time. I think Kevin Costner and Men in Tights, as much as you hate that film, those were the only two that actually like somewhat worked for a lot of fans. Whereas Russell Crowe's failed, Taron Egerton's massively failed. And when a lot of people go, well, what's your Robin Hood? A lot of them will still go back to the very, very old school one or the animated, because that's the one that works. But then you also got your remakes for foreign films. You got the ones where they were huge successes in overseas, whether they were Korean or Japanese films, and they feel like that they can't bring them over to the US because, language and all this kind of stuff. So they remake the films. I mean, probably to me, at least in terms of awards, probably the most I don't want to say popular, but probably the most prestigious one probably be Eternal Affairs, which ended up becoming the Departed.
Yeah.
You also got and then you also got the horror aspect. You got Ring You, which ended up becoming The Ring. I forgot what The Grudge was. The Grudge was another one.
It was The Grudge.
Was it The Grudge in both one?
It had some other Japanese word in front of it, but it was The Grudge. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, and then you got we were talking about this because I was trying to watch some martial arts movies last month. Drunken Master.
Mm-hmm.
And then also Police Story turning into Super Cop, where they're basically these stories worked over here, bring them over to the U.S. They try to Americanize it up because
those weren't remakes so much as they were sequels that got Americanized to them.
Well, for Jackie Chan's, yes, but Departed, Ring You, Grudge, those
right, some of the Jackie Chan ones.
Yeah. But I mean,
in the case of form, that's the thing about remakes is the question is always why bother remaking a movie? You know, if it's already good, why remake it? And there's a valid argument to be had there. But the thing is, if a movie is bad, let's say a movie is bad, but you know that story has potential. You can remake it, and maybe you could make a really good movie out of it, and that happens sometimes. But if a movie is great, it's like, well, do you bother remaking it? Because how you get onto the original? West Side Story would like to say hello to that.
I was about to say, like, West Side Story is a prime example.
And that's what everybody was saying of West Side Story. I really enjoyed West Side Story. Is it better than the original? Is it worth? I mean, I like them both. I'm sure each version has their people who prefer it, but I think that there's no reason for it not to exist. But then it comes to the case of things like foreign films, where yes, these foreign films might be excellent films. Infernal Affairs is a great film, but there is a large segment of the audience that is going to be a barrier for them. They are not going to watch it. And so it's like, well, this other original version isn't disappearing. People who prefer that can still watch that, but let's make one that's more accessible to American audiences. And so you get stuff like The Departed and things like that. The Birdcage, Fistful of Dollars. There's lots of movies. I mean, a lot of Kurosawa has been basically adapted and remade.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you got Magnificent Seven.
Yeah.
For example, there's so many of Kurosawa that is basically like, well, yeah, have you ever seen Kurosawa's movie of this? That's basically what this is. Yeah. And you're like, oh, not really. And then you go back and you watch the Kurosawa films, like, oh, wow, this is really beat for beat what this other movie was. You know, and then, of course, I would say probably one of the biggest genres for reboots, remakes is definitely the horror films. I mean, whether they are continuations of stories or just complete, let's wipe the slate clean and start over. I mean, and was it 2000? Oh God, what was the year when you had the new? Was it 2010 where we had the new Freddy and new Jason?
2009 was Freddy. 2010 was 2009 was Friday the 13th. 2010 was Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, which you and we both discussed this. We both really, really actually enjoyed the new Friday the 13th. We thought it was actually really good. A lot of people didn't like it, and we have not seen a new Friday the 13th since. Nightmare on Elm Street did not work. I don't think it was a casting. I think it was more of a script thing. I think
and a lot of people, myself included, did not like the new version of Freddy either.
No, they took what made Robert Englund's Freddy great, and they kind of neutered it. Even with someone as great as Jackie Earle Haley, who was a fantastic pick for Freddy, and they kind of just neutered that character. And once again, we have not seen a Freddy since. Should we see a reboot or a remake of Freddy and Jason? I wouldn't say no.
I think you absolutely will. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah. I mean, Halloween has been the prime example. I mean, we've had 2 reboots of Halloween. We had the Rob Zombie, which definitely went away. Oh, definitely went down a different road with those. I was not necessarily a fan of those. And then we've got the current adaptation, which is a requel, because it's basically pretending everything after the first film didn't exist.
Well, that's the newest trend. The newest trend in Hollywood seems to be not only are we going to reboot, do the requel thing, but we're also going to ignore the ones that people didn't like. You had, I think the first one I remember doing it. I'm sure the
terminology they use. They're, what's the word when they're pretending that the other ones don't exist? It's not backtracking. It's
you're retconning.
Retconning. It's always an R word. Have you noticed that? It's always an R word.
So the first one, I'm sure there are others, but the first one I remember doing it was when Superman Returns came out, and they said Superman 3 and 4 never happened. We're going 1, 2, Returns, 3 and 4 never happened. And then since then you've had Halloween. We were just talking about how they basically said, well, Halloween did it twice. One of the Halloweens one of the like H2O or
Halloween
whatever.
H2O, which I actually thought was a really good
That
film.
ignored everything but the first two.
First two, because it was
Two.
still brother
And
sister.
then this new one ignored everything except the first one. Is that correct?
Yeah, because in Halloween H2O, Jamie Lee Curtis was still brother and sister with Michael Myers, which she didn't find out till the second Halloween.
Mhm.
This one, they pretended it was just a rumor because they retconned.
Yeah, they always throw in a line like that to kind of
Yeah, they
reference.
throw
that
that
they're
line in there.
doing
They
stuff.
go, no, that was just a rumor. They're not brother and sister,
Yeah.
because the second film didn't happen. So two different versions of Halloween has really tried to. They've tried to do spin-offs. Like Halloween really has tried to go out of its way.
They're really trying. Terminator did it with Dark Fate.
Yep.
Everything except 1 and 2 was out the window.
Yeah.
Alien was gonna do it. There was gonna be a new Alien done by the guy who did District 9, whose name just escaped me all of a sudden. But
yeah,
but
no.
he was hired basically. He was going to do a new Aliens movie, which is going to ignore everything except for Alien and Aliens, the first two movies. Then that ended up not happening because Ridley Scott's like, no, I'm going to come back and do my thing, and then he fucked it up.
Yeah, he fucked it up with Prometheus. And Alien Covenant wasn't bad, but they still went Prometheus-y with it.
Yeah, but that's kind of the newest trend. And the other one, I'm sorry, do you have anything on that subject?
I mean, with horror, I mean, there's ton with horror.
Oh yeah, I got myself on a tangent. Sorry, go continue with your.
Yeah, no, I mean, you got The Mummy. You know, you have the OG Mummy. Then they try to let's go more action, fun story with The Mummy with Brendan Fraser, which you and I both love. And they try to do let's redo the whole Universal monster history with the Tom Cruise Mummy, which
I didn't hate.
I never saw it. I still need to check that out at some point. But then they also tried doing Wolfman with Benicio del Toro, Anthony Hopkins. It's not great. It's not bad in any means.
Dracula, if I recall, Dracula is the first or second most portrayed character in film history.
Yeah.
As far as the number of iterations, yeah, him and Sherlock Holmes, from what I understand, are the two most. They've been done the most different times.
Frankenstein has been done, many different adaptations of Frankenstein. I wouldn't necessarily call them remakes or reboots for the Frankenstein character. Invisible Man. They did a modern day version of Invisible Man a couple years back. It worked really, really well.
I prefer Hollow Man myself.
Hollow Man's not the Invisible Man, though. Hollow Man's Hollow Man.
It was basically Invisible Man.
Hollow Man, where you can see an invisible version of Kevin Bacon's junk throughout the film. You just only like that because Elizabeth's shoes in it. Don't lie.
It doesn't hurt it.
It doesn't hurt. Then you have like the failed attempts. You got like The Fog, House of Wax, Wicker Man, Psycho, which
there was this period in the early 2000s to like the 2011-12 where Hollywood went remake crazy, especially for 80s shit. I mean, I remember within like a 2-year span, you had like Red Dawn, Carrie, Footloose, Annie, RoboCop, Fright Night, The Thing. It was just like they went 80s remake crazy. And I understand how people are like, there's no original ideas anymore because there's just so much of it. Now, granted, I liked a lot of those remakes. So it's like I don't automatically hate stuff just because of that. But it does people have valid argument when they're like, why don't they make original movies anymore? I get it.
Yeah, I think of the ones you met. Did you mention Fright Night?
I did.
I loved Fright Night. I love the new Fright Night.
I prefer the original. I mean, I like the original, but I prefer this one.
Yeah, I mean, Poltergeist wasn't necessarily a bad remake. Obviously, then there are the ones that are the great successes. It, Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Chapter 2, not nearly as much as Chapter 1, but every one new Chapter 2 was not going to be as good.
The other one was a miniseries, but it's still a remake.
Yeah, which was going to go into our. I was going to segue. I was going to try to do a perfect little segue.
See, I always ruin your segues.
No, you're fine. So it segues us to TV remakes, reboots, adaptations. So, with it was a miniseries, and they decided to make it into 2 films, which worked immensely because these latest It's were great. Now, granted, would it, and this is up for another discussion for another day, would it have worked if Stranger Things wasn't already out? Who knows? Because everyone already had the Stranger Things bug going, and everything was like really going into the 80s with these younger actors and all that stuff. I think it still would have worked because I think it still would have worked.
I think that it's just a matter of because they both came out. When did Stranger Things first start?
Stranger Things was 2016, 17.
Because 17 was the first It. So it's like they both kind of came out relatively close together. And it's like, I think no matter which one came out first, I think it would have fed the other one. Because
Stranger Things was.
And Stephen King's another one. There are already remakes of Pet Sematary and Carrie and all that. And there's remakes coming out of like anything that's not already. There's new Christine coming out. There's new everything. Salem's Lot.
Yeah, 2016 was when Stranger Things started.
So it was a year before it. But yeah, like I said, I think if it came out the other way around, it still would have been it would have fed that instead. I think they shared that audience.
I will say there's in terms of like how people will say there's no good video game movies, which now that trend's kind of started to go away because video game movies are actually starting to get put out really well. TV show reboots and reboots, because they're basically reboots. They have not had a good positive rating. I mean, I'm just running down the list here. Charlie's Angels, both versions. Yeah. Bewitched. Yeah. A-Team.
Don't knock A-Team.
A-Team was fine. It was fine, but they really wanted that to become a franchise, and it did not go through. Pink Panther. No. Scooby-Doo. No. Dukes of Hazzard. No. Wild Wild West. No. The Avengers. Greatest what the fuck moment in movie history. Not a good movie.
I enjoyed Dukes of Hazzard too, to say. But
Smurfs, Alvin and the Chipmunks. Your favorite. Speed Racer.
Oh, God.
Fat Albert, Popeye, Miami Vice, Garfield, Underdog, Dudley Do-Right, Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle, Inspector Gadget, Lost in Space, Land of the Lost.
You're going down a lot of kid stuff, though. I mean, but there are successful ones. There's The Fugitive. There's MASH.
Yes.
Oh, no, wait, MASH is the other way.
MASH more of the reverse effect.
I realize that.
Fugitive, yes.
The Fugitive
worked immensely.
Here's the thing: is because they found a good 2-hour story to tell. The problem is you take these TV series that usually have been running for a long time, have this long history of stuff, and you're like, well, how do we just make a single movie that people think is worth? Like, let's go see it in a movie theater when we already have 100 episodes of it at home we can watch. And so The Fugitive found is one story they could make a 2-hour movie out of it, and like there are plenty of bad ones, there are good ones. I mean, there's stuff like, okay, I think the big problem is finding the tone with TV remakes, because sometimes they try and do it direct tone and it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they try and do the spoof thing. You know, you take a serious show, or not even a serious show, like you take a show like Brady Bunch, and the Brady Bunch movie is basically a spoof of the Brady Bunch, but it was fun. But then you take, other shows like Chips or Baywatch or some of these things, and you're like, okay, let's turn this thing into a comedy, because I think a straightforward movie isn't going to work. And they usually don't. Now, Baywatch, I enjoyed a lot of the performances and the jokes. The overall story was stupid.
No, the story was horrendous, but I didn't hate the performances. I think everyone knew.
I think there were good jokes and good characters. I think the movie of Baywatch was not good at all. But then Chips sucked and things like that. But that seems to be the thing where sometimes it works to spoof something. Like Starsky and Hutch was decent,
I actually.
But again, that was kind of making fun of the original show. It didn't take it seriously. So it's just a matter of, if they're going to approach something, they can do that, but then they're going to piss off people like, oh, you made it a joke instead of making a serious adaptation.
Yeah, it's just for some reason, like I said, going through a lot of that TV show list, taking TV to movies has not worked that well.
Yeah.
Like I said, there are very, very few exceptions, like The Fugitive, and even then, they even tried to spawn that off to a sequel with U.S. Marshals, which I didn't hate U.S. Marshals.
I didn't hate it, but it was nowhere near the level.
Close, yeah.
It was practically a remake too. Let's be honest.
Exactly. It pretty much was like they pretty much tried to do almost no mention of the previous film, even though he was the same characters. And then of course, you've got the OG versions of reboots or remakes, which is the classic films, whether they be cults or whether they be remakes, where people are just trying to say, hey, this film was a huge hit back in the day. Let's modernize it with today's technology or with today's stars, or let's modernize it kind of like with Disney. Let's modernize it with today's version of culture and everything like that. Some of them work really, really well. Others fail immensely. One of them, for me, that you got this double-sided coin. You got one version of it that failed completely, and then you got another version that works, to me, far superior than the original, which is Planet of the Apes. You got the Planet of the Apes franchise, which everyone, the first one's a classic. And then you had like 5 sequels, which are like, and then Tim Burton tried to do it in the 2000s. It was one of the worst garbage films. But then they started over with the trilogy. And the trilogy, granted, the first one for me is just okay, but the last 2 films were, for me, 2 of the best films of each of those respective years. And it turned Planet of the Apes into a respected franchise. Whereas like, the original franchise, you had a respected first film and some, mediocre to okay sequels to this phenomenal trilogy that got better, as it went on.
Now, is that? I think I know the answer, but I guess that is a reboot. I was always curious. In that storyline of the new Planet of the Apes, does that lead up to the original movie? Is that?
I would say.
Are they prequels or is it just a complete reboot? Again.
Well, Tim Burton's is a straight up remake or remake.
Oh, Tim Burton's. Yeah, I was talking about
Tim Burton's 100% remake. Planet of the Apes trilogy, I would say, is a reboot prequel series. Because it's showing you how they got to that point. They actually haven't really technically made a Planet of the Apes movie. They're supposed to be making that now with kind of the same group. So that one is a prequel continuation, kind of like what we did with Cruella and stuff like that. Which, like I said, it works. You got the Godzilla and King Kongs now. You've had many iterations of King Kong. I think you've had 3 or 4 different versions of reboots for King Kong, which now they've connected it to the Godzilla franchise, which there's been multiple iterations.
Godzilla's had tons of reboots.
Yeah. Each movie is pretty much its own kind of version of someone else's take on it. James Bond. I mean,
James Bond is one of those. James Bond is a real gray area because every movie is a sequel, but it's also a reboot every time they get a new Bond. But it's also
we were discussing, I was trying to figure out how we're going to make a title page for this. You go, dude, just throw Casino Royale out there. It's all of them.
It's everything because it's a remake. It's a reboot because you got Daniel Craig, but it's also a requel because you're still carrying over because Judi Dench and
Q from the Pierce Brosnan one.
They still carried over into there. So it's a sequel at the same time. So requel, and so that's a real gray area. The other gray area I get into, kind of talking about with Planet of the Apes, The Thing with Mary Elizabeth Winstead.
It ends up being a
prequel.
It's a side sequel, like 300 was.
Yeah, but it kind of is a remake because it's so similar to the first one, but it's basically a prequel sidequel. And then 300 is the real anomaly. 300 Rise of an Empire. And I actually like the way they did that because there are parts of it that take place before 300, parts that take place after, parts that take place alongside. It weaves in and out. So we called it a sidequel, and I loved that about it. I mean, not everybody's as big a fan of the movie as I am, but I just loved the way that they weave the stories together. And the other gray area I get is the ones that it's usually because of some low budget movie was a hit, and so they're gonna make a sequel that's gonna be a more mainstream movie. But they're like, well, people might not have all seen this original movie, so you get things like Desperado or Evil Dead 2, which were basically remakes, but they were sequels. And you kind of
Evil Dead rebooted or requeled itself again in the 2010s, which at first was just going to be a straight up remake, but then they added Ash at the very end of it, which made it a requel. Which it's like halfway through the film, they're like, well, let's continue this further, and now they got the TV series and all that kind of stuff. So it's such a windy road where it's like it starts at one point and then it continues, and then I guess depending on how they feel about the film, they bring everything right back around again. And that's kind of where a lot of these kind of come into is I feel like most of the time studios, they're like, let's reboot or remake this franchise or this movie. But then as the film goes, they decide, hey, we need a little something else to spice this up. Or this movie's going really, really well. What if we connected it to what it was previously? And sometimes, like I said, it works in their favor. Like Star Trek, I think it worked in their favor.
Or you're talking about later on connecting it. Spider-Man No Way Home.
Yes.
There's the ultimate murky waters one.
Yeah, because I mean, you have 2 franchises that were dead for the Spider-Man. And then you brought it all back around full circle, and it worked immensely. The only thing now is to somehow bring the Spider-Verse animated into this world, which supposedly that's connected to Venom in a way, which I would love to see how the hell that's going to work.
I didn't hear about that.
Well, they basically they connected it in a way. When Venom came out, it was also showing the previews for Spider-Verse, meaning like in another universe. Like they actually tagged that at the end of Venom in another universe, and they showed like 10 minutes of Spider-Verse. So ipso facto, because of a line, they're in the multiverse together, kind of thing. But there was never other correlation with it the rest of the way. And and that's kind of, and then same thing with now Batman with Flashpoint. You got Michael Keaton's Batman coming back, and they're connecting these older films which are beloved. And a lot of people, especially with the comic book franchises, are going, well, that's not my Batman. That's not my Spider-Man. Like, okay, cool. We're going to embrace that. And we're going to bring them into that world and have them with these other versions of these characters. So that way, you're right. That is your Batman. But these are other people's Batmans too. And they're all together. Or the Spider-Man, let's put them all together. Which in Spider-Man, it worked near perfection. We'll see what happens with the Batman. But there are other times where that stuff just doesn't work.
Well, like you said, I think a lot of times the studios they really don't have a plan. They really kind of see how things are going, and they decide it's the same way they used to be like, okay, we're making the series successful. Oh, this one sucked. Okay, let's reboot it. And so you get a Batman starts over, or Spider-Man starts over, or whatever it is. But then you get things like the one that jumped to mind, obviously, it was Ghostbusters, where they're like, okay, we're going to make a new Ghostbusters.
Are you talking about 2016? Are you talking about
I'm talking about 2016.
Okay, yeah, because that was a whole other situation.
We're in Ghostbusters 1 and 2. They're like, people still want Ghostbusters. They've wanted Ghostbusters for 30 years since the original, whatever it is. And so they're like, okay, we're going to make another Ghostbusters. And then they give us that Paul Feig thing, which is, in my opinion, not good, not funny at all. But I mean, some people went way too far, just over the top, destroying it just because it was women, which I have no problem with women. What I have a problem with is the way they just ignored everything before it and tried to reboot it and changed everything. And then they even had like the original stars show up in it, but not in their roles, just like cameos and stuff. But anyway, that movie came out and flopped. So they're like, you know what? All right, that one didn't happen. We're going to try again. And this time,
and we're going to actually make sure everyone is who they are.
This time, even if they didn't have those people in there, which they did, but if they didn't, they're like, okay, that one didn't happen. This is a sequel to the second one, and we're just going to skip that third one. The funny part is when they came out with a box set of all of them on 4K or whatever, when the new one came out, and they left out 2016. And Paul Feig was all like, "Oh, my movie just didn't exist. Just pretend it didn't." And he's like, trying to start this uproar, and everybody's like, "Yeah, no, we're cool with that."
Yeah, well, because that's kind of the other, to back up on that as well is Ghostbusters 2016. For me, I hated the first 30 minutes, but I felt like once they actually got into the Ghostbusters of it all, I felt like the movie got stronger as it went on. It's still not a good movie, but I don't think it's as bad as everyone makes it out to be. But the problem with that one is it was almost kind of doing I'm going to call it the Last Jedi of it all, where it's like, look, fuck these older movies. This is a new Ghostbusters. And to double down on that, here's all the beloved characters you loved, and we're going to basically make them pointless. Like Bill Murray. We're going to kill Bill Murray in 2 seconds just to kill the most favorite character of the Ghostbusters. It's not Venkman. He's going to just be some douchebag character you're not going to like.
No, they're not even funny cameos. It's just exactly. Like they almost purposely made them look stupid.
And it's like, let's put them in the movie to get people to come see this because like, oh yeah, they're in the movie. But it's like, we're going to fuck you over. And they're not going to be those characters. And we're basically going to say, screw the history that we have here. Mm-hmm. And it pissed everyone off. It had like I say, a lot of people want to just point at the girls. And go, oh, because you made them female. It has nothing to do with it. It's that you basically pissed all over the legacy of what these two previous films were. Now, granted, a lot of people don't like the second Ghostbusters, but you have to respect the road that it.
Well, that was my thing. Is I always said if they wanted to make a team of all female Ghostbusters, I have no problem with that. Even with those 4 actresses, I didn't love all the performances necessarily.
No, I'm the same way.
But if you wanted to make a team of female Ghostbusters, that's great. Why couldn't it be 4 women who decided, hey, we're going to open a Ghostbusters franchise? Because they even said the franchise rights alone in the original movie, they're going to have franchises across the country because obviously one can't cover the whole country. So these 4 girls could have started up their own Ghostbusters business, but it could still exist in the world of the first 2 movies. But they said, no, we just ignore that.
Yeah, let's piss all over it. Now, here's the thing. Is like when we were discussing the spoiler review for Afterlife, the story that we wanted could have been Ghostbusters 2016 if they hadn't screwed over the original series. Had they brought in Venkman and at that time,
Ramis
was alive then, right?
In 2016, yeah.
Yeah, you could have brought in all Venkman, Egon, Winston, and wow, I'm totally blanking on Aykroyd's name.
Ray Stantz.
Ray. And you could have brought them in and like, hey, ladies, this is how you guys become Ghostbusters. And you could have kept that going and had it be in that world and respected the franchise. And I think people would have been like, it maybe still wouldn't have worked because they just were really, really against the females. But because they were trying to go, no, this is the first ever Ghostbusters. There's no other Ghostbusters. This is it. That's where they're going the wrong way. Whereas with Afterlife, you still were respecting the franchise, but you were bringing in a younger group. And had they done that with 16, respect the franchise, bring them in like they did in Afterlife, not to overtake the film, but just kind of go tip the nod. We're handing the torch over to these characters. I don't think it would have been as bad. I don't think
people would not have had near the backlash they have.
Exactly. And it's because they went about it completely the wrong way, where Afterlife did it in a respectful, embracing manner.
The story was still 99% about this new group of people. Yeah. The other people were barely in the movie, but it still did it respectfully.
And while it was technically a requel, because it is using the same villain from the first Ghostbusters, and it's doing a lot of things, which, yes, the member berries of it all, but it worked. And you know what? Sometimes when you're doing a franchise that's so beloved like that, you may need to give that first film, like Force Awakens, the member berries to the fans to have them embrace the love of what they saw and saw, hey, here's a new version of this. It's a lot of what you've seen before, but we're showing you that we can do this. And once you guys are okay with these new group, we're going to push this further. But we're going to lead you in with stuff you love, so that way we can go further with it. Which I think Star Trek was the perfect.
Unfortunately, Rian Johnson pushed it too far. But
yeah, Rian Johnson went.
But again, he was just like, screw what you love about Star Wars. Anyway,
exactly. But Star Trek, I think is what did it perfectly. It was like, here's these characters, you love these characters. These are new versions of these characters, but they're new versions in a different alternate reality. Here's Nimoy to kind of usher everyone in, say, hey, your versions are still out there. They're just done differently, or they're younger versions of these versions. And it let everyone kind of just be like, okay.
Honestly, Star Trek's been very good about that. Paramount in general has been very good about that, because when Star Trek The Next Generation, which is the first new Star Trek series since the original, the original crew came out, they did the same thing. They started Star Trek Next Generation, but they knew people might not, this isn't my Star Trek. So they had Bones was in like the premiere episode of it, I remember. And he kind of ushered everybody into the new show. And they went, okay.
The movie Generations, same thing. It transitioned everything from Kirk to Picard and everything. Not like, granted, those movies weren't that great afterwards, but it handed the torch over respectfully and did it in a way that it allowed the diehards to embrace the new way and kind of go with it. Like, these aren't replacing the characters that I love. It's just transitioning to a new thing, kind of like what they're going to have to eventually do with a lot of the MCU. Iron Man and Captain America are done. They had to transition to Anthony Mackie as Captain America. They're going to have to transition a lot of these actors to new people. Now, the way they do it's going to greatly depend on how a lot of the fans are going to perceive this stuff. Black Panther is a really big one that we're going to have to watch this year, and how they're going to transition that with Chadwick Boseman passing away. But that's how these reboots, I'm not going to say the remakes, because remakes are basically starting over from scratch, but the reboots and the requels, that's how they have to do this. So that way they don't get the fan backlash. Now, in terms of Scream this year, it backlashed for me. Like, and that's I don't know why I loved Force Awakens and Ghostbusters Afterlife, which is doing the exact same thing that Scream did, but for some reason, Scream just left a very, very sour taste in my mouth with the way they did it. I can't explain why. It was probably a script thing, and a lot of it was probably the cast. It was doing the exact same thing that Afterlife and.
Well, I think part of that. I think because Force Awakens and Ghostbusters, to use the examples you use, they hit on this a lot of the same beats and a lot of the same little references to the original, things like that. But Scream was already a self-referential franchise. It was always kind of playing everything to the horror genre with this wink and kind of thing. And so when they did this movie, they make all these references to the original films like that, but they're almost like, wink, wink. You remember that? And it's like it does seem to be a bit too much. Now, I enjoyed Scream more than you did, the new one, but honestly, upon rewatch, I'm like, I don't enjoy it as much, because it is kind of like.
Well, yeah, I think my main problem with it is once they revealed the two killers. Granted, we're spoiling a movie that's 3 months old now. Yeah. Once they revealed the killers, and it's like in the same room and in the same house and the same plot, but just modernized for them. I was like, okay, no, this doesn't work.
A little too many coincidences.
Yeah, it's like, no, this is basically a remake.
No, granted,
it's not a requel, it's a remake.
They do kind of help make that forgivable because the killers in this case are purposely trying to reproduce this thing at the same place, at the same kind of way. So it makes sense to the story, but you're still kind of like,
a lot of it could have also been I was not in love with the performances, mainly the female actress at that time. She was going so over her trying to be like Matthew Lillard in that sense. I was like,
and it's another one where we had a way better version of the movie that we came up with anyway. So
exactly, we both came up with a way better ending. If you guys want to know what that ending is, watch the Scream review of that. We definitely came up with a better ending for that. We didn't do a spoiler review for that. When did we talk about that ending? Or did we not talk about that on camera? I can't remember.
I don't remember.
Well, our ending was when no, we're not gonna do it. No.
Did we not do a Scream spoiler review? I thought we did.
No, we didn't. You didn't want to do it because I didn't like it and you did.
Oh, that's right.
You didn't want to do it because you don't like doing spoiler reviews if we don't agree. That's behind the thing. If Brian and I don't agree on a movie, he doesn't want to do a spoiler review with me because he feels like we're gonna battle. I want to do it because it brings a different side of it, but he doesn't like doing that. So no, we didn't do one for Scream. No. Just like we didn't do one for Batman because you didn't like Batman and I did, and you didn't want to do a spoiler review because of that. I think Doctor Strange we're 100% going to do one though, but yeah, it's that's the problem with these requels is just like if you're not trying to completely tread water and retread the water like Scream did, except it didn't work for me. But Force Awakens, yes, they're doing a lot of the same plot from New Hope, but they're doing it differently in ways that it worked for me. And I love Force Awakens. Force Awakens is one of my favorite Star Wars films of all time. I love that movie.
And plus I think most of the things were broad enough. It's like, yes, you take down one empire, but something else is going to fill that vacuum and try and build up into a new threat. And then, yes, you're going to have a new hero is going to rise to the occasion. You have Rey is kind of paralleling Luke Skywalker did. And I think that the parallels were general enough. I mean, yes, there's the Star Killer base versus Death Star. Yeah. Okay. I'll agree with you on that one. But for the most part, it was general enough that you're like, okay, I can still go with this.
Yeah. And then you have something like Dark Fate, which was a requel. I think it worked really well. You and I, our most watched review.
Yeah, 20,000 people.
Really apparently liked it. But we're probably not going to get another Terminator movie after that because not enough people enjoyed it. And it was a solid requel. I think they did a pretty good job with it. I don't know why. Maybe people are terminated it out because they kept trying to redo it.
I think that's it. I think there were too many times they tried to because even I think in some of the earlier ones, I think was it Genesis was another one where they said, okay, we're ignoring the last couple movies. Those didn't happen. And so people like, nope, that one sucked too. Okay, let's start over again with this one. I think a lot of people are just like, you know what, we're done.
I think Genesis pretended that 3 and 4 didn't happen.
Right.
Or Salvation. Salvation is not technically 4. Which, yeah, once again, you stop at the best one, which was Judgment Day, because no one's gonna pretend Judgment Day didn't happen. It's like, are you kidding me? But and then you mentioned it earlier, is that a lot of times they will remake a cult film and try to, hey, a lot of people loved this movie. It didn't do a lot of great money back in the day, but let's do a present day version of it, or not present day, but like a version of it. And a lot of those also don't do what? I mean, look, they got Red Dawn, you got Point Break, Rollerball was another one.
Point Break actually had a super successful remake called Fast and the Furious.
Yes,
it's the same damn movie
without the intent of trying to make it a side one. The Fast and Furious franchise is, very, very prosperous, but Point Break remake was not.
The official Point Break remake, yes, was not good.
Red Dawn was another one that just even though you had Hemsworth in it, it didn't work. Rollerball, I remember they were marketing Rollerball immensely, and the movie was just not good. Robocop. They tried to remake Robocop. You like it. We talked about it. It's not bad, but it's not gonna redo everything that happened before. And then you got your musicals. Like I said, you brought up West Side Story. Hairspray was an actual achievement over its previous predecessor.
Footloose, I like more than the original.
Yeah, A Star is
Little
Born.
Shop of Horrors, so much better than the original movie.
Absolutely. A Star is Born, they've remade 2 times now, and
I
each
think there's been at
time
least 3 or 4 versions at this point.
there's 3 versions of film because you got Gaga, you got Streisand, and you got Garland. I can't remember if there's a 4th one. I think it's just those 3. But they've all built on each one they've done before. And then, like I said, Hairspray is way better than the original Hairspray. And then you've got, these other films like trying to redo the epics. You got like the Ben-Hur film, which I don't know if anyone actually saw Ben-Hur, when it came out. Yeah, you said it was. It's not good, but it wasn't as bad.
It's not good, but I've seen far worse. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you've got the I don't want to say these are technically requels because they are connecting the tissues of the previous films. That these ones worked immensely, which was Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, which if you take one line or one little scene out of the movie, it's its own thing. It's not a connective tissue to anything in it. But by putting that in, you made it a part of the original Jumanji universe. And that has they chose to go a video game route with it. And it works.
It worked.
They went modern with it.
That was I think the best remakes do is they take the story, but they put a new twist on it. It's not just a carbon copy of the original.
Yeah, and they say, how can we change this? Like, yeah, we did a board game last time, but board games, I love board games, but a lot of people don't play them anymore, but they play video games. Let's put it in a video game version and let's make it like a video game, and it works. You got a great cast around it. And of course,
not only do you have the story of it being this video game, but then you have the whole thing of like people being like the avatars. They are like these, archetypes of people, and it just works so well.
Why is my weakness say cake? And of course, probably of modern day, one of the best requels ever made, Mad Max Fury Road.
I was going to ask your opinion on that. On what is that? Is it a sequel? Is it a reboot? Is it a remake?
Yeah, it's hard to say because granted,
because there's technically no reference to any earlier events that I'm aware of.
No, but they're not.
Really, Mad Max already exists in this world, so
exactly, they're not introducing us to Mad Max. It feels like they're just kind of continuing on with Mad Max in this world. So in that respect,
I guess it'd be a requel, yeah.
Yeah, it feels like a requel because they're not pausing the movie to go, here's Mad Max, here's what's going on. It's like, look, if you've seen Mad Max, you know what Mad Max is. Let's go into this. So it feels like a requel in that respect because, like we said in, or was it last month's actor start showcase, we're talking about Charlize Theron. Mad Max is not the main character of that film. Furiosa is. Oh no. And that's why it feels like a requel with me because it is called Mad Max Fury Road. But he is not the focal point of the film. Furiosa is. And because you don't need to waste all that time on Mad Max because people who watched the Mad Max franchise before, we already know who Mad Max is. And that's why I feel like it is a requel instead of a reboot or remake because they're not slowing down the story to tell you why is the world like this? Why are people the way they are now? It's just, did you guys watch Mad Max? Cool? You good? All right, we're going on. And that's why I feel like it's a requel in my eyes. But it's situations like that. And then you got your bad ones where like Clash of the Titans. It's like, well, let's put modern effects. And it's just like, oh my God, this movie sucks. And then they made a sequel and it sucked even more, and
honestly, they aren't that much worse than the original, but the original one it's not great.
We're going to be talking about cult movies next week. And that one definitely is a cult. I love the OG Clash of the Titans.
Oh, when I was a kid, I loved that movie.
I loved it. It's hard to watch now because it's so badly filmed.
The old Harryhausen effects are pretty dated.
Yes, but I remember watching the first new one with Sam Worthington. I was like, I hate this movie. And I was so excited for him because it's like Sam Worthington, he's really hot right now with Avatar and everything and Terminator Salvation.
It's one of those post-convert 3D movies too.
Exactly. And I remember watching it going, I hate everything about this movie. And Wrath of the Titans was better, but still shit. And you saw this. I can't say, but Total Recall. That was another one where there's like, let's remake Total Recall with Colin Farrell. Better, worse, equal to
honestly, I'd put it on par because it's like I don't think it's worse because the original one it's definitely got a tone to it. It's that Paul Verhoeven kind of it's intentionally cheesy kind of thing going on, and it's got the Arnold Schwarzenegger one-liners and things like that, and it works. It's a fun movie. The new one takes a more straightforward, serious approach. It's not doing that tongue-in-cheek kind of comedy thing, and I think it's actually a decent movie. It's not a great movie by any means, but I don't think it's worse than the original.
Yeah, and so going kind of wrapping this all up. I mean, we're not wrapping it up, but we're kind of bringing it back to thing. Let's talk about our OG films. The films itself, there are a lot of OG films out there that a lot of people are talking about that are unremakeable. Don't you dare touch this. Don't mess with this film. Don't even breathe on this film. For you, what are some of the films that a lot of people would consider untouchable that you wouldn't mind seeing a remake of? And what are some of the ones that you're like, no, I agree. Don't fucking touch that. And then there's like, you know what? They probably could adapt this and make this better.
That's the question I would like to.
I know. I'm throwing you on the spot here. I kind of was coming up with this. I was like, this would actually be a really good way to close the show.
This has been a good question to have ahead of time, though. Well, as far as ones that I think are untouchable, I think you would never want to remake Raiders of the Lost Ark.
So so don't remake Indiana Jones.
When there was the looming threat of kind of rebooting Indiana Jones with Shia LaBeouf, which is kind of where people thought they were headed.
Well, then you also had them try to do it with. They were going to do it with Pratt as well.
At one point, they talked about doing it with Pratt. Although I'm not sure if any of that was official. I think a lot of that was rumors.
No, it was just after Crystal Skull bombed, and they were like, "We're not going to do it with Shia. Like, who could we do it with?"
Right.
And Pratt was the name in kind of everyone's mouth for everything at that time.
Right, but at the same time, I would love to see Chris Pratt in an Indiana Jones style adventure, but I don't think I want to see anyone else as Indiana Jones. Then again, I always said they shouldn't have anybody else playing Han Solo but Han Solo, and Alden Ehrenreich did a great job of playing Han Solo. The movie had some flaws. I still enjoyed it, but Alden Ehrenreich did a great job. And
they're still trying to get him back to do like a miniseries or something.
I heard he might show up in Lando, so we'll see.
Yeah, they're trying to continuate with that, and I'm okay with that. If they come back with him, that's fine. And yeah, there are characters like that where it's like, don't ever try to have anyone do this character again. And there are actors like him where it's like you're watching, it's like, damn, he actually is doing a really, really good job. Like the movie itself is not, it's not his fault. Like same thing with Donald Glover as Lando. Like you're watching, like he's doing a great job as Lando. Like I can watch it, and that's why they're going to probably do a series with him as with him as Lando, assuming that they can get through all the other stuff. But
a lot of times, I think the ones that are they shouldn't remake come down more to iconic performances and characters like Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, because like the one that jumped to mind briefly as I was trying to look real quick, they should never have anyone else try to play Captain Jack Sparrow. Now they can make more Pirates of the Caribbean movies with other pirates, because like apparently they're going to. I think at one point it was Margot Robbie and Karen Gillan was considered at one point. I don't know what's going on at this point. I have no problem with that. But they're never going to get another person who could be Jack Sparrow the way that Johnny Depp was.
Okay, what are your thoughts on E.T. and Back to the Future franchise?
Oh, Back to the Future, yeah, that's one people talk about that a lot lately with Tom Holland. They always talk about when they're talking about Back to the Future, because he definitely has that.
Tom Holland does have very Michael J. Fox.
He's very much Michael J. Fox. He got that to him. So I mean, if they were going to make one and they had him in it, I'd be like, I guess that's probably your best bet. That's the best chance of success. However, it is one of those where I'm like, don't do it. Just there's too much chance for it to not be good. You know,
I feel like with the way the world is today with technology, that they would have to do 80s again. Which at that point, if you're going to do 80s again with it, then what are you doing to improve it? At that point, you're just remaking it just to remake it. Now, if they're doing present day and he's going back to the 80s or to the future, whatever, it's like, but I don't care about the present day shit. Like that's why Back to the Future is so great in what it is. And then they're gonna have to change the story up because they're not gonna have the whole Thompson and him like maybe hooking up because it's his mother and daughter or mother and son thing. But you're also, I find it very like, yes, Tom Holland could be a great Michael J. Fox, Marty McFly type of character, but I feel like you're not gonna have that same magic that Fox and Lloyd had together. And finding an actor like Biff. And you about to recast on me?
I'm about to recast one role on you.
Okay.
Why not use Zoe Deutsch for Leah Thompson?
I mean, that perfectly works.
Come on, be perfect.
But it going to recast, sidetrack everybody because we love doing recasts. Who would you cast as Lloyd? Who would you cast as Doc? That can match that same energy that Fox and Lloyd had with a Tom Holland. And that's the thing, because you have to find someone who's kind of the older version of you don't want to find someone that's like a Ryan Reynolds age because it's too young, but you don't want to go too old because you still got to let him be able to.
Honestly, Christopher Lloyd at the time was not that much older than Ryan Reynolds is now.
No, but his hair made him look like he looked
like it. In the words of John Mulaney, it's like we don't know if this guy's 40 or 80.
Yeah, but I mean that's the thing is if you can find that kind of thing, but then it's like, are you still going to use the DeLorean? Are you going to try to modernize it? Because that's what I'm saying. It's like, don't touch the DeLorean. That's iconic. You can't. Yeah. But then it's like, once again, it's like you're not going to have a DeLorean in 2022. So if you're going to do it, you're going to have to go back to the 80s again, which at that point, what's the point? E.T. could. What about that? Would you consider an E.T. remake with modern technology? Problem is that you wouldn't have practical anymore. It's probably going to be all CG.
That's a tough one to call, because it's like, yes, they could do the effects better, but ET is one of those where the effects they used are clearly like, puppets and things on screen. It's like it almost kind of added to the endearment of it. And when you put a CG in it, it's going to seem like any other movie that comes out now.
Yeah.
And
that was the same argument that you and I had when we were talking about Little Shop of Horrors when they're going to do the remake. It's like,
I guarantee it's going to be a CG.
Yeah, it's like as long as you don't mess up the plant. Wow, I blanked on the plant.
Audrey too.
I knew it was something too. As long as you make him practical and a puppet, give me a good cast with some good music, I might be open to it. But it's like, don't mess with it. And with E.T., that's the same kind of boat. It's like the wonder of E.T. is that he was a puppet and he did feel real. As soon as you take that CG element of it, you lose something with that. And I'm not the biggest E.T. fan. I think E.T. is rather overrated, but it is a classic. I respect what it is. But as soon as you try to remake that, now, could they make an E.T. film about E.T. on his home planet, like a prequel that led him to go there and have that be a whole thing? Sure, do that. One of the most interesting things I ever did when I went to Disney World when I was young age, or Universal Studios, I went on the E.T. ride. The waiting line is E.T.'s planet. And waiting in that line for 2-3 hours for that ride was more enjoyable than the ride itself, because it was all this new E.T. crazy colors and like Avatar kind of shit. It was like, this is really cool. 10-year-old me thought that was great. I was like, I wouldn't mind seeing a movie like that. But I don't think you can touch the E.T. story as a whole.
Yeah, I guess I probably would be against it. I wouldn't want them to remake it. If they made one, I'd give it a chance, because that's the thing is there aren't a whole lot of movies. I like the original Star Wars. I wouldn't remake the original Star Wars, even though there are effects and things can be done, although George Lucas kind of redid half of that himself. But there are not a lot of movies where I'm like, you absolutely cannot touch this movie and remake it, because my opinion is, if they're going to remake something, fine. Maybe some people will like that one that didn't like the original. Maybe it'll introduce them and make them want to go back and look at the original. If it sucks, like I said, the original's still there for me to just watch and ignore the new one. We've talked about this when we talk about sequels. There's a list of sequels that I pretend don't exist. Everything from Speed 2 to, tons of other stuff. But it's like, it's the same thing with remakes. There's remakes where I'm just like, you know what? That came out, I didn't like it, but hey, I can still watch the original. Yeah. So there aren't a lot that I would think that absolutely can't be remade.
On top of the ones that you brought up and that we talked about already. Now, for me, one film that I feel like should be untouchable, and it's because of how it was shot and the way it was all done. It has to be Jaws. Leave Jaws. Don't ever try to do Jaws again, because you're not the absolute. I don't want to say it was a failure, but the absolute shit show of what the puppet was. Or for Bruce, and how he looked, and why, because it didn't work 90% of the time, they had to create that element of horror of the shark's point of view. You're not going to get that with today's story. You're not going to get those performances from Roy
Scheider.
I almost said Snyder. I was like, that's not the right actor. And Richard Dreyfuss, and help me on the third one because I'm blanking on his name.
I just blanked out on myself.
Exactly. I was like,
I was James Mason, but it's not him.
No, it's not James Mason. We love him, but we're blanking on his name. You're not gonna get the way that movie is shot, the beauty of the scenes out in the ocean, that moment where the actor that we're
Robert
playing,
Shaw.
Robert Shaw, that moment where he talks about the Annapolis, you can redo those scenes, but they're never going to recapture the same essence that movie did. Same thing with the opening.
And I also feel like that kind of movie, just the tone and the pace of that movie would not be successful in today's market.
Even
they
that
would turn into just an action fest of Jaws, shark attacks and things.
Like we did that with the Meg, and you know what? That was what it was. The Shallow is really great. It's not Jaws. That's fine. You can have shark movies. Just don't.
Deep Blue Sea. I love Deep Blue Sea.
Yeah, Deep Blue Sea is a funny, hilarious B movie horror / comedy kind of film. Just don't try to redo Jaws. Like one of my favorite shots.
I think the closest thing you have to a Jaws remake is Jurassic Park. It has that same kind of atmosphere.
I'm gonna get.
I did it again. Sorry.
I'm gonna get to Jurassic Park here. Is it one of my favorite shots in movie history, and it's talked about widely. So it's very cliche of me to think it's one of my favorite ones. But I know they're not gonna be able to recapture the same way. Is that moment when oh my God, Roy Scheider's character. Brody, thank you. God, my brain's for me having this one be my favorite movies of all time. I'm blanking on all the character names. Is that moment where he's on the beach and he's constantly trying to see, and everyone gets in his way, and you get that moment where he finally sees the shark, and it does that panoramic zoom on his face.
Mm-hmm.
That is an iconic shot in movie history, and I feel like if they remade Jaws, they're gonna try to redo that shot, and it's not gonna work, and it's just gonna look like stop. You're trying to force it now. And you're not, those are just little moments of movie magic. And just like that, we're going to need a bigger boat. If you try to remake that and you try to drop that line, it's not going to hit the same way. It's going to be more of a laugh line which it is a laugh line in that day, but it was more of like he's terrified. It wasn't a joke kind of thing. Whereas in this one, it's not going to hit the same way. And going into that, Jurassic Park, granted, we would have to be, decades down the line before they would try to remake Jurassic Park, just like they would try to remake Star Wars, because Jurassic World, there's a continuation with it. I mean, that was a requel in itself, but with Jurassic World. But don't touch Jurassic Park, because the practical effects of that film, the phenomenal performances of Sam Neill and Goldblum and everybody in that film work for that scene. Those scenes with the sharks and the puppeteering and all that, they don't hit the same way as they do now with the Jurassic World franchise, because they're CG. And it's ones that you can keep making Jurassic World films. They're going to, after this last one here, they're going to continue a new franchise. This is not the last Jurassic World film we're going to get, because it's going to do great in the box office, whether it's a good movie or a bad movie. They're going to continue the franchise, probably with new characters and stuff down the road. But you can't remake Jurassic Park.
No.
You're not going to capture the magic in Jurassic Park. Jurassic World did the closest to capturing the magic because it brought us back to Jurassic Park.
And again, there's no reason to, because it's not a case where we can update the special effects. They hold up just fine.
Yeah, Jurassic Park looks better than anything the last two Jurassic Worlds have done, because the T-Rex, the Velociraptor, the Dilophosaurus, the Triceratops, the Brachiosauruses, all of them look so real to today's standards. And that movie is almost 30 years old, and it still looks as real as it does today, and it looks more real than the movies that are coming out right now. Not that these CGI ones look bad, but they don't look like 1993's. And that's why you can't touch that. Same thing with Jaws. Yes, the Bruce the shark looks like a fake shark. But when that shark comes up and it's on that boat and it is snapping at Robert Shaw, or it's coming at Brody at that last moment of the movie, that is going to work better than any CGI shark coming in super fast and furious. It's like, it is the practicality of that magic. And that's what
Fast and Furious meets Jaws.
What's that?
He said Fast and Furious meets Jaws.
Exactly.
That's
one of those things too, where it's just like, yes, movies are getting made more and more and more now, but it's also one of those things where just because the technology is there to make things look realistic without having to put them together, it almost feels lazy that they don't want to try. And I don't blame the directors. I'm sure directors, like, want to, like Hellboy, for example, where we want to, build these characters. We want to put, puppeteers and all that, but then the studio's like, that's too much money, or that's going to take too long. Just CGI the thing. And it's like, don't be lazy. Don't be complacent with the current technology. Bring back the puppets. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, another film remade many times. The 90s Turtles. I know you don't like those films, but the 90s Turtles look more realistic and better as those, people in suits than these Shrek-looking motherfuckers in the last two Teenage Mutant Turtles films. And it's once again, you see those turtles and you see the 90s Turtles. And I'm going to watch the 90s Turtles over and over and over again compared to these ones. Why? Because they feel more real to me. They feel more real than like, oh, here's this, clearly Megan Fox is looking at a tennis ball up, 8 feet tall, and have her look up here. That's where Leonardo's face is, compared to this guy in a rubber turtle suit that I can look at and see and go, but yeah, that's Leonardo right there. And it's so sad. And this is a whole separate, subplot talking about practical effects to CG, but that's why I feel like those movies can't be remade. And that's why those are OG movies. And there's tons of others that shouldn't be touched. But like you said, if they have a way to build on the story, to make the story better, and not just do it for a cheap buck, which I know that's what studios are wanting to do, then any movie, in a sense, could be remade. But just like in Jurassic Park, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. And that's kind of where these reboots, remakes, and requels come into play. Do you have a story like Ghostbusters Afterlife or Force Awakens that is really going to elevate the story, push the narrative, push the story to make it build on a stronger case to these previous films? Or are you just trying to copy and paste for a cheap buck? And that's the problem with a lot of them nowadays. They're copy and paste. And that's why a lot of people are getting so frustrated with no original ideas, which also sucks because you have movies like Ambulance with Michael Bay, which we were discussing this, is that it made like $8 million last week on its opening weekend. And we were like, man, like, granted, Ambulance has its issues. We discussed it. But it was Michael Bay doing something original. But because it's making no money, he's probably just going to go back to stuff like Transformers. And we're missing out.
Speaking, it's a remake of a French film, but
is it?
Yeah. Although it's the Michael Bayized version, so I'm sure it's very different.
Okay, but yeah, I was like, why are you telling me? I was like, he's about to ruin my point here real quick. But it's one of those things too, where like Everything Everywhere All at Once. It's a brilliantly original film, and halfway through watching this movie, I was like, this is one of the most original films I've seen in a very, very long time. It's using a lot of other things, but it is in its essence an original film.
It's very new, very different. I just went and watched Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, Nicolas Cage. It's done something different than everything else that's out there. It's worth seeing.
This lucky motherfuckers got to see it a week earlier than me. I have to wait till Thursday, like all you commoners as well. But he got to see it earlier. A lot of people got to see it earlier than me. But yeah, that feels like an original film. And what sucks is that it's probably not going to do that well in the box office compared to what's going to be coming out here in the next week or two, which granted that's going to be Doctor Strange, but Doctor Strange is doing something crazy and everyone's going to want to see that. Or it's probably going to lose to Fantastic Beasts in its second week when it comes out next week. Fantastic Beasts is probably still going to stay, once again, you're doing prequel, sequel series. It's not going to be probably nearly as good of a movie, but it's probably going to make more money because people are familiar with Harry Potter. They're familiar with those characters. And a lot of people aren't probably going to pay to see Nicolas Cage go full Nicolas Cage with Pedro Pascal. Same thing with The Bad Guys that comes out next week as well. That's a fun, unique animated feature. Yes,
but it's not a franchise. It's not an animated franchise, so people aren't going to rush out to see it.
It's a different kind of animation style. It's got a great voice cast, but it's not a familiar thing, and it's probably going to fall apart. Same thing with The Northman that comes out next week. It is a brutal, unique take on Vikings. Outside of the TV series, you haven't really seen a whole lot of Vikings movies. Great cast again, great director behind it. But these three movies are probably all going to be behind Fantastic Beasts in the box office. And if they somehow are ahead of it, they're going to get obliterated in the following week or next week or two from Doctor Strange. But then that's the problem, is you're going to see that they're not making the money and the studios are like, let's go back to what works. Let's go back to this. And that's, like I said, the death of the movie theaters. While we talked about that a couple months back, like you said at the beginning of the episode, those movies are what are saving the movie theaters. And so it's kind of a toss up. You can either have the original films where people aren't going to go out of their way to go see and pay money for in the theaters, or you can have the Fast and the Furiouses, the MCU, DC, and all these films out there that are going to make millions, almost billions of dollars. But you're going to lose the essence of unique and original stories for reboots, remakes, requels, and yeah, that's basically it. Do you have anything else you would like to add?
No, but as I do at the end of every show, it seems I have fact checking for you. Lion King 2019 made $1.66 billion to become the number 7 highest grossing movie of all time.
But how was that Rotten Tomatoes score after everyone actually went and saw it? It was not good.
The thing is, Disney doesn't care what the Rotten Tomatoes score.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Harold Ramis actually did die in 2014. So while the new Ghostbusters movie was probably being made then, he was not alive when it came out, the 2016 version.
Gotcha.
And lastly, there was a 4th version of A Star is Born starring Janet Gaynor in 1937.
Which is probably the first one.
I think that's the first one.
After it. I don't hate the fact checking stuff at the end of the episode. That's totally fine. It's like movie fights where you have to come back and go, yeah, that thing you said was total bullshit. But anyway, anything else you would like to add to the episode?
No, I think we've covered everything else.
All right. Well, we hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the Movie Crusaders Chat About. If you guys did, go and hit that like, share, and subscribe button to the channel so you guys stay up to date. Well, the latest videos pop up on the Movie Crusaders. Of course, you can follow us on all the social media outlets you see below. Coming up next, like I said, we'll be back next week to talk about cult films. Yeah, I could say, what are we going to talk about for that? But it's about cult movies. We'll find some. We have no plans when we go into these episodes. It's like, well, we're going to talk about this, and we're just going to go off and see what it takes. It's like we had no plans going into this one, and I think it was a very fun conversation overall. Reviews for Fantastic Beasts, The Secrets of Dumbledore, and Everything Everywhere All at Once reviews are out. Next week, like I said, Bad Guys, Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, and The Northman all come out. If they're all 3 available in my area, I'm going to try to watch those as much as I can and have all of those reviewed. And then, of course, the following week, Brian and I will be back again as we go over our summer movie preview, where we will talk about our the outlook for the summer films that are coming out this year, where we think they're going to land, what are going to be box office successes, and we think are going to be disappointments. So yeah, feel free to check all those videos out. I'm Sean Waskrug. That is Brian Michaels. We are the Movie Crusaders. Until next time, in case we don't see you, good morning, good afternoon, and good night, Movie Crusaders.
You're still here. It's over. Go home.